So yeah, it's this week, Parshat Pinchas. We talked in the past about Pinchas, Yeshua, the Korbanos. This year we focused on the daughters of Tzelofchad, the story of Bnot Tzelofchad. Very specifically, we asked, why does the Torah mention their names again and again and again? Twice in this week's Parasha, we find their names, all their 5 names, and also we find their names again in Parashat Masei. Why does the Torah do that? Why does the Torah mention their name time and time again? What is this story of Bnot Tzelofchad really about?
And we actually saw that it wasn't just their names that are mentioned this Parsha. There are so many names in this Parsha. This Parsha is almost like the Parsha of names, named after Pinchas, and there are many, many names in it. And we tried to dive into what is this trying to teach us.
Exactly. As we've discussed in the past, a name in the Torah always has a meaning. What does it mean in this week's Parsha? What does it mean that this Parsha is all about names? And very specifically, what does it mean about Bnot Tzelofchad? What does it reveal to us about the story of Bnot Tzelofchad? Because this story is incredibly deep. There's a reason we read the story of the daughters of Tzelofchad now during the 3 weeks between Yud Zayin B'Tammuz and Tisha BeAv. You want to take a look? Hope you enjoy. So yet, Shivasar B'Tammuz today, Parashat Pinchas this week, beginning the 3 weeks, entering the 3 weeks up to Tisha BeAv, the time that we mourn the Mikdash. The past few years in Parashat Pinchas, we discussed also Pinchas, we discussed also Yeshua, and we also talked about the Korbanos that we surprisingly find at the end of the Parsha. I think what's left to talk about is the story of Bnot Tzelofchad, the daughters of Tzelofchad, who approached Moshe and asked him for a piece of land to inherit, since Tzelofchad, their father, had no sons, and they were only daughters, and they wanted to make sure that they are not going to miss out on their father's name, and since they are only girls, they're only daughters, they are supposedly not supposed to get any piece of land. So they approached Moshe asking him for a piece of land. And when you look at the story over there are many questions to ask, but I want to focus on one very, very specific question, because we find Bnot Tzelofchad a few times in these few prakim. We find them twice in this week's Parsha, and we find them again in Parshat Masei in 2 Parshas time at the end of the Sefer. And in this week's Parsha, even though we find them in 2 very close instances in the Torah decides to list out all the daughters' names, who exactly they were. When the Torah goes through the names of Am Yisrael and the counting of Am Yisrael, the Torah lists the daughters of Tzelofchad and gives us their names. And then just a few psukim later, when we are taught about the story of Bnot Tzelofchad, the Torah again says, Ve'ele shmotam, these are the names, Machla, Noach, Hogla, Milka, and Tirza. And the obvious question is, why list them again? Why not just say, these are Bnot Tzelofchad? We already listed their names. So why does the Torah feel the need to emphasize their names again and again and again in Parashat Masei at the end of the Chumash? Why are we listing them time and time again? What is this about? And obviously there's also much more to the story of Bnot Tzelofchad. So what is really hiding behind the story of Bnot Tzelofchad?
Yeah, that's fascinating. And actually, what I just noticed this year when I was reading the Parsha, that it's not just there where we see the names show up over and over. There's something about this entire Parsha. This entire Parsha seems to be the Parsha of the name. Everything about the Parsha is focused on telling you people's names. And I'll explain what I mean. Go to the beginning of the Parsha. At the end of last Parsha, we have the story of Pinchas. And the story of Pinchas is described in last Parsha without name. Pinchas is mentioned, but then it talks about the Ish Israelite and the Isha, right? We have the Midianite and the person who we know was the leader of the Shimon tribe. Well, it doesn't say their names over there. But then at the beginning of our Parsha, it starts with Pinchas. By the way, the name of the Parsha is Pinchas. Not very common to have a Parsha named after someone. We have Yitro, we have Noach all the way at the beginning, we have Balak, but it's not that common. So we have Pinchas, and the Parsha starts by just talking about him, his name, Pinchas, Lazar, Aaron. We know who he is. We just mentioned his full name just a few psukim ago. But it doesn't stop there. It goes on and says, and the name of the Ish Israeli is Zimri ben Salu, and the name of the Isha is Kozbi Batsur, telling us these are their names. But let's continue on in our Parsha. We have in our Parsha many psukim describing the counting of Am Yisrael. We've seen other places where Am Yisrael were counted, but what's unique here is there's many psukim which don't say anything. They don't give you numbers. They don't say much. It just says you'll have Yeshuv, Mishpachat HaYeshuvi, Shimron, Mishpachat HaShimroni. It just says over and over and over the name and their family, right? Name with their family. And at the end, it also has the numbers. But most of the psukim, most of the time, and we know how much sometimes the Torah can say so little, use one pasuk to say so much, and here we have so many words just saying these names. And sometimes we'll dive even into more detail. We'll talk about specific names. We even mentioned Datan ve'Aviram, even more than that. You know a name we never heard of, Moshe Rabbeinu. We have a pasuk that describes that The wife of Amram is Yocheved, and she has 3 children. If you weren't listening until now, for the past, I don't know how many Parshas, now you'll know. One of them is Aaron, Miriam, and Moshe. Wonderful. What is going on? And this continues, and as you said, we have the description of the specific names of Tzelofchad, and then their names again. What is going on? And I think this stands out very much in contrast and maybe completing what we spoke about last week. As I mentioned last week, the idea of Am Yisrael suddenly coming together, not anymore just as Bnei Yisrael, but as Yisrael in singular. This new entity, Am Yisrael together, Klal Yisrael, that know their mission in the world and are this one unit, and they're described in singular. And that's wonderful and special, but sometimes the result of thinking of everything only in the Klal level is you can miss out on the individual. And what the Parsha has here is the exact opposite of that. Yes, we have this new entity, Israel. Yes, this is what we want to achieve. This is our mission in the world. But how do we achieve that mission of Israel as one? It's built up from these individuals. It's built up from these names, and each name is important. And I'm going to mention them by name, especially the ones who stand out. The ones who stand out, by the way, not always for good things, also for bad things, because each individual can change everything. One individual who stands up for good can change everything for good, and one individual who stands up for bad can change everything the other way around. And that's what I think our Parsha is teaching us. We have this story, but let's dive deeper. What was her name? What was his name? What is their name? We've discussed in the past the concept of counting, of lifkod and su'u, how it raises each individual and points at them. The whole concept of counting is really pointing out each individual, but much more when you're not even focused on the counting. Most of the psukim, you're focused on their names, their families. This is the key. This teaches us the Parsha is the key to the success of Israel. You want to succeed as Israel, as that one entity filling its mission in the world. It's not going to happen through that. It's expressed through these individuals who step up and do their mission. And that's what we have here in our Parsha. And maybe that's also what we see with Moshe and Yoshua. When Moshe turns to Hashem and says, yeah, I know, I see Am Yisrael is growing up, is almost ready to enter the land. But who? Give me a name. Who is it going to be? Who is going to lead the way? I want to know, who are these names? Who are these people who stand out? And I think that's exactly the story of Tzelofchad. We mention them by name because they deserve to be mentioned by name, because they stood out, because they didn't just accept things, and they stood out to the point where they brought into the world a new halacha that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't even know. By them asking their questions, by them stepping up and speaking to Moshe and pointing this out, this new halacha came into the world. These are people we want to mention. We don't want to just throw them into the bucket. We believe in the individual, not in the sense that everyone should be so full of themselves. How are they going to make an impact? How are they going to make a name? It's all about me. No. It's all about Israel. It's all about the joint mission. But how are we going to achieve that? That's through every single individual who doesn't just sit back and wait for the others, who stands up and takes responsibility and deserves to be mentioned by name. And you know, it's interesting. All of Torah, we look at Torah, we think of it as a book of the law, right? The laws of Judaism, the Torah. This is what we were taught, how we follow the ways of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But when you actually open it up, what do you see? You see stories of people. This person did this person did that. Meaning that same idea of the Torah, of how God wants us to live in this world, about all our halachot, everything is given through the stories of these individuals. That's how it comes into this world. That's how we meet it in the Torah, and that's how we meet it also in the world.
Brilliant, very good. I really like what you're saying, that really the entire Parsha, maybe Parshat Pinchas, is about the responsibility each individual has, the power each individual has to step up and make a change, to step up for the tzibur, for the crowd, for society around them, for the public around them, and act for them. And by acting and by stepping up, by making a name for themselves, they're going to help the entire society around them, the entire people around them, to move forward, to get to the better place they have to get to. Like you mentioned, we see that with Pinchas in the beginning of the Parsha. This is what Moshe is asking for. Once I'm gone, who is going to be the person? Give me a name. Who is going to be the name? And that same Yoshua is the one that Moshe Rabbeinu gave him his name. Let's not forget that. Moshe Moshe Rabbeinu gave him that name back in Parashat Shlach, just before Chet HaMeraglim, just before that terrible sin of the people who did not want to go into Eretz Yisrael. Moshe changed his name to make sure that the love of the land will stick with him, the love for Eretz Yisrael will stick with him. And just before the story of Yeshua replacing Moshe Rabbeinu, we have the story of Tzelofchad, who I mentioned by name again and again and again, because this is what it's about. It's about making that name for yourself. We talked about this also in the past, about what does this concept of a name mean in the Torah. Obviously, every single name has a meaning. We know this all the way back in Parashat Noach, like you mentioned, but with the story of Migdal Bavel, where they wanted to create this tower. They wanted to stand out in order to make for ourselves a name. When you make a name for yourself, that means you are standing out. You are taking action. Like you said, it could be a good thing, like Pinchas, and it could be a terrible thing, like Migdal Bavel. Really, the question is, what is driving you? Are you doing this for the society around you? Are you doing this for the people around you? Or are you doing this for yourself? So you stand out, like Korach wanted back in Parashat Korach, or like here with Tzelofchad, they're doing it out of the love to Eretz Yisrael, and not only the love to Eretz Yisrael, but also the love for Am Yisrael. Because when you look at these two stories of Tzelofchad, the story we have in this week's Parasha and the story we have in Parashat Masei, they both teach us a very important lesson, a very important halakha. In this week's Parsha, we find the story where they want to inherit the land because they don't have any brothers. They love the land, they want the land, and the halacha is said that they could inherit that land, they can get it, and that in a case where there are no sons, the daughters can get it. But then later on in Parashat Masei, the tribe comes along and says, hold up, if they're going to marry out of our tribe to somewhere else, to someone else, we are going to lose this land. Our tribe is going to lose the land. And then in the psukim over there, they are taught that if they want to keep the land, they have to marry within their tribe. But this is also what later on, many years later, taught Chazal. Chazal taught Am Yisrael that tribes are allowed to marry each other. And being on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, there's 3 weeks leading up onto Tisha BeAv, you can't not recognize the idea or the thought or even the messages behind these stories. These stories of Tzelofchad that we are reading Dafka in these weeks, they always fall out around Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, the 3 weeks. We always read these parashot over here because this is what they were about. Tisha BeAv, the mourning that Am Yisrael mourns, the suffering that we had on Tisha BeAv throughout the generations, started first of all in the desert by Chet HaMeraglim, the spies that came back. That was the day of Tisha BeAv. The night of Tisha BeAv is the night that Am Yisrael sat down and cried. And Chazal teach us, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, you're crying out for no reason because you don't want to go into the land because you hate the land. I'm going to mark this day to be a terrible day for generations where you will be crying every single year after year on this day. And many, many years later on Tisha BeAv, the Mikdashes were destroyed, each Mikdash, and the second Mikdash was destroyed because of Sinat Chinam, because of Am Yisrael not getting along together. And these two sins, the sin of not wanting to go into the land and the sin of not liking Am Yisrael, of not getting along together, this is what Tzelofchad are actually really about. If you look at these stories, this is what they're trying to fight. This is the love that they are showing. They are showing the love to the land, and they're showing the desire, the love, the connection to all of Am Yisrael around us, to the different tribes around us. And this is not only about Tisha BeAv, but 7 days later after Tisha BeAv, we celebrate Tu BeAv, Tuvia and Yitzi, which is also a very special day because, again, Chazal teach us two things happened in those days. First of all, Metei Midbar stopped dying. The people in the desert who would die every single year on Tisha BeAv night because the sin of the spies stopped dying on Tu BeAv in the 40th year. But then also on Tu BeAv, many years later, that's when Chazal came along and taught Am Yisrael that they are allowed to marry between the tribes. These are the two messages that Tzelofchad are teaching us, the message of the love of the land and the message of the love of Am Yisrael. And as we know, beginning of Sefer Shmot, when we came out of Mitzrayim, Chazal teach us, Bizchut Nashim Tzadkaniyot Yatzu Yisrael Mitzrayim, because of the righteous women of Am Yisrael had the merit, had the zchut to go out of Eretz Mitzrayim. Maybe Chazal are also teaching us here that Bizchut Nashim Tzadkaniyot, we get to inherit the land and we get to stay in the land and we get to build the land. This is why these stories are finishing off Sefer Bamidbar, basically finishing off the stories of Am Yisrael in the desert, because Sefer Devarim is all about Moshe Rabbeinu and his last few weeks, his last day, telling over all the Torah Kula. Maybe this is what Chazal are teaching us over here now in the 3 weeks, now between Yud Zayin B'Tammuz and Tisha BeAv, these two great sins that have been with us all these generations, the sin of not wanting the land enough and the sin of not doing enough for Am Yisrael, for Ahavat Chinam, for the togetherness of Am Yisrael. This is what Tzelofchad are about. Each one of them stepped up, took the initiative and stepped up to teach Am Yisrael this. This is the name they made for themselves. This is their name, the name of Ahavat Chinam and Ahavat Eretz Yisrael. Maybe these are the messages over here behind the stories of Tzelofchad, behind the reasoning of mentioning their names time and time again to tell us, Na'aseh lanu shem, each person can make themselves a name. But what kind of a name are you making for yourself? Are you making it a good name? Are you making something good out of your name? Or chas v'chalila, you're making something terrible? Tzelofchad teach us time and time again with all their names, with all the 5 of them that they wore, what Ahavat Eretz Yisrael is about, what Ahavat Am Yisrael is about. And maybe these are the messages that the Torah is teaching us here in these parashot in these few weeks now.
Beautiful, beautiful. And it's interesting because right after the story of Tzelofchad come the psukim when Hashem turns to Moshe and says, your time's up. That's it. You're going to have your last mission you still have to do. Go up to the mountain, see Eretz Yisrael. We know we still have quite a bit of Parshas till that actually happens. But this is the moment when Hashem tells Moshe, your job here is done. And it's interesting because if what we said in the past about Mei Merivah, how Moshe was too dominant and only once Moshe stepped aside, then, this new concept of Israel was born. What we see in our Parsha is not only the concept of Israel is born, but also all these individuals who step up. And maybe when Moshe sees all these individuals step up, these new leaders, and he's going to ask in a minute about Yoshua too, who's going to be the leader. But this is what Moshe needs to see before being ready to leave this world, that there are others that are standing up and going to lead the way. And what's fascinating, and I think we mentioned this in the past, what's fascinating about the story is that just before Moshe leaves, we have a story of people coming to Moshe and Moshe doesn't know the answer, saying it's not all about Moshe, it's about the Torah, it's about what Moshe was bringing into this world. And here we have these 5 women coming up to Moshe and Moshe doesn't know yet. They're bringing something new. Now we're ready for the next stage, for Moshe to finish his role in this world, to give his last words, and for Am Yisrael with Yoshua to move into the land and with its new leaders and new people until this generation, those people who stand up and take the responsibility when it needs to be taken.
Very good, very good. Excellent. The men, the women of Am Yisrael who have to step up and take the initiative for Am Yisrael. This is what this parasha is about. We're out of time, so we'll end here. We'll just remind the viewers again, we've discussed both Pinchas aspect, the Briti Shalom. How is the man of violence also the man of peace? How does that make sense? What is the story of Yoshua and Moshe about? If Pinchas is such a great leader, why doesn't he replace Moshe? Why is it Yoshua? That's another video. And we also talked about the korbanot, the sacrifices. What are they doing in this week's parasha? Why are they not in Sefer Vayikra? We'll link those videos at the end of this one. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like it, comment below on YouTube, tell us what you like, tell us what you didn't like, and of course, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing and help us grow the channel. And Shkoyach Yitzi.
Shkoyach Tuvia, Shabbat Shalom.
Shkoyach Tiu, Shabbat Shalom. Mitzvah Hashem, we'll talk again next week, and Bezrat Hashem, we should see Beit HaMikdash be built, be mera b'yameinu.